IB Biology Ecology Part 1 will have its focus on energy flow through ecosystems. After setting the foundation with some definitions, we will follow energy into, through, and out of ecosystems. The essential ideas are the continued survival of living organisms, including humans, depends on sustainable communities, and secondly, ecosystems require a continuous supply of energy to fuel processes and to replace energy lost to the universe as heat. Here is the outline of movies available for the IB Bio Ecology Core unit. This movie is focused here. In addition to examining the way in which energy flows into, through, and out of a system, we will examine the way in which matter cycles within a closed system. Here is our first IB syllabus statement, and as promised, we have some definitions to get behind us. Define species, habitat, population, community, and ecosystem. As well, it's important for you to get to know the terms biotic, referring to things living, and abiotic, referring to things non-living. Ecology is the study of living organisms with one another and between living organisms and their non-living environment of matter and energy. Ecology is living organisms living with other living organisms and with the abiotic factors in the environment, such as temperature, light, rainfall, aqueous chemistry, soil pH, by way of example. An ecosystem is a community of different species interacting with one another and with the chemical and physical factors making up their non-living, the abiotic, environment. The non-living environment is important here. Light, temperature, rainfall, soil pH, water chemistry, and more. Here are the definitions of species, population, and community. Species, a group of alike organisms that can interbreed to produce fertile offspring. A population, group of organisms of the same species living in a defined area. And community, populations of different species living and interacting in a defined area. Here are the next IB syllabus statements. State that sunlight is the initial energy source for almost all ecosystems. Explain that energy enters and leaves ecosystems, but that nutrients must be recycled. Now, keep your eyes open. You will need to explain that energy enters and leaves ecosystems, and explain that nutrients cycle within the system. In this diagram, we have a model of the Earth. Light arrives from the sun, proceeds through the system from plant to animal, and then out to the universe as heat. Nutrients, also known as matter, atoms with measurable mass, stay within the system, cycling from the organic, the living material, to the inorganic, the non-living material, and back. Sunlight is a continuous but variable supply of energy, while the supply of nutrients in an ecosystem is finite and limited. Pay close attention here. The biosphere, the portion of the earth that supports life, consists of interdependent and interrelated ecosystems, terrestrial ecosystems, aquatic ecosystems, oceanic ecosystems, and soil ecosystems. Ecosystems have the potential to be sustainable over long periods of time with steady supply of sunlight and nutrient cycling that supplies inorganic nutrients. Sunlight is a continuous but variable supply of energy, while the supply of nutrients in an ecosystem is finite and limited. And that brings us to the next IB syllabus statements. Define trophic level. Describe what is meant by a food chain, giving 3 examples, each with at least 3 linkages. Do not use general names such as tree or fish. Describe what is meant by a food web. In this diagram, we have 2 food chains, the terrestrial on the left and the aquatic on the right, where energy moves from one feeding level to another, from one trophic level to another. A trophic level can be formally defined as the number of energy transfers away from the photosynthetic transformation. Autotrophs conduct photosynthetic transformation of solar energy to chemical energy. Photosynthesis should be familiar to you. As you describe food chains, you need to be able to state specific organisms for each trophic level: sunflower, grasshopper, shrew, rattlesnake, eagle. An autotroph, these organisms at the base of the food chain, manufactures its own organic molecules from inorganic nutrients. Heterotrophs feed on the organic molecules of other organisms by ingestion. Once again, here's the definition of trophic level, and here's another example of a food chain providing the names of the different trophic levels: producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, and tertiary consumer. A food web, seen here, is a complex network of many interconnected food chains and feeding relationships. Just for the record, we have more than one producer. Producers can be the food source for different consumers, and consumers may have different food sources at different trophic levels. Consumers, all of these organisms, are heterotrophs that feed on the organic molecules of living organisms by ingestion. And more IB syllabus statements that by now should be familiar to you. Distinguish between autotroph and heterotroph. Deduce the trophic level of organisms in a food chain and food web based on their mode of nutrition. Avoid the use of herbivore and carnivore. Consumers are heterotrophs that feed on the organic molecules of living organisms by ingestion. The organisms at this trophic level are autotrophs, also known as producers. Autotrophs photosynthesize, manufacturing their own organic matter from inorganic nutrients. Heterotrophs, these organisms, obtain their organic matter by consuming other organisms. Now, you should be able to deduce that this organism is both a primary consumer and a secondary consumer. You should be able to deduce that this organism is both a secondary consumer and a third-level consumer. Here are definitions of autotrophs and heterotrophs. I'll let you study this slide on your own. Well, at this point, could you construct a food web containing up to 10 organisms using appropriate information? Could you state that chemical energy in carbon compounds flows through food chains by means of feeding? With a food web of a marine coastal ecosystem in front of you, let's define habitat as the environment in which a species normally lives or the location of a living organism. Now, can you deduce the trophic level of the whelk, or the trophic levels of the lobster, or trophic levels of the seal? Here is a terrestrial food web. Can you identify the food chain with 4 links? Why are food chains limited to 4 or 5 links at most? Food chains are limited to 4 or 5 links because whenever energy is transformed, some energy proceeds to a less useful form, a more disordered form, an increase in entropy, heat. As high-quality chemical energy is transformed to heat with each trophic level, there is less and less available to higher trophic levels. Thus, due to the second law of thermodynamics, less energy per area is available in the ecosystem with each successive trophic level. So here are the relevant IB syllabus statements. Explain the energy flow in a food chain. You need to know that energy loss between trophic levels includes material not consumed, material not assimilated, that means taken into the body and transformed, and heat loss due to respiration. These are all energy losses from a food chain. You also need to be able to state that living organisms cannot convert heat to other forms of energy. Heat is lost from ecosystems to the universe. As light arrives to an autotroph, some is immediately reflected, some of the energy evaporates water, and some is absorbed by chlorophyll within the chloroplast and transformed into glucose. This would be gross primary production. In other words, light energy is transformed into chemical energy in the carbon compounds by photosynthesis. Now, the plant uses some of this glucose for its own carbon compounds and for its own needs, releasing heat through cell respiration. The amount of energy left over after the plant has used some and released heat is known as net primary production, and NPP allows the plant to grow larger or provides food for the heterotrophs. Remember that chemical energy in carbon compounds flows through food chains by means of feeding. In this diagram, we have a plant, as you can see here, taking up water from the soil, energy from the sun, and carbon dioxide from the air. Plant biomass is gained when carbon dioxide is taken up and transformed into glucose. This is known as primary production. Now the plant spends some of its carbon compounds, the glucose, for its own needs, active transport, protein synthesis, releasing carbon dioxide. Whenever energy is transformed, some of the energy proceeds to heat, and heat is lost from the ecosystem. Now some of the glucose resulting from photosynthesis is transformed into larger organic molecules of the plant stored on the plant. This is new growth of the plant, and these organic molecules of the plant would be available to a heterotroph as food. In this diagram of an energy pyramid, you can see that there is a substantial amount of energy at the base and less as you move through the trophic levels. Whenever organic molecules are broken down during respiration by any organism at any trophic level, energy is transformed, and some energy proceeds to a less ordered form, heat, which leaves the ecosystem. So with each successive trophic level, less and less energy is available on a per area basis. Thus, energy pyramids for food chains appear as pyramids. Energy losses between trophic levels restricts the length of food chains. The biomass of the top trophic level is smallest because as organic molecules are broken down, carbon dioxide is released along with the heat. Here is the relevant IB syllabus statement. Explain reasons for the shape of pyramids of energy. You should be able to explain the shape of an energy pyramid while articulating the second law of thermodynamics. Whenever energy is transformed, some of the energy proceeds to a greater disorder, a less usable form, heat. There's an increase in entropy. But don't forget the first law of thermodynamics. Energy can be transformed but not created or destroyed. The solar energy absorbed by autotrophs is equal to the energy contained in the glucose. This is a fine example of the first law. Also remember that energy losses between trophic levels restricts the length of food chains. And keep in mind that the biomass at the top trophic level is smallest because as organic molecules are broken down during respiration, carbon dioxide is released along with the heat. Here is an energy pyramid of a stream for you to study. You can calculate the efficiency of energy transfer from one trophic level to the next. From producers to primary consumers, the efficiency is 14,000 divided by 87,000 times 100, or in other words, 16%. But from primary consumers to secondary consumers, the efficiency of energy transfer is 1,602 divided by 14,000 times 100, 11%. From secondary consumers to third-level consumers, the efficiency is 4%. Remember, energy losses between trophic levels includes material not consumed or material not assimilated, as well as heat loss due to respiration. Here are two IB syllabus statements, both of which you've already seen. Explain the energy flow in a food chain, remembering that losses would include material not consumed or material not assimilated, and heat loss due to respiration. Energy losses between trophic levels restricts the length of food chains and the biomass of higher trophic levels. Here is an energy pyramid of a salt marsh. You can see the energy losses from producer to primary consumer are dramatic. The efficiency of energy transfer can be calculated as 1,278 divided by 152,000 times 100. This is less than a 1% efficiency. And then notice that there are only 3 trophic levels. Energy losses between trophic levels restricts the length of the food chain and the biomass at higher trophic levels. Energy losses between trophic levels includes material not consumed or material not assimilated into the organic molecules of an organism, as well as heat loss due to respiration. Now this is a biomass pyramid And biomass in terrestrial ecosystems also diminishes, much like energy, along the trophic levels due to the loss of carbon dioxide, water, and other waste products such as urea, as organic molecules are transformed with successive trophic levels. The biomass in terrestrial ecosystems diminishes along food chains due to the loss of carbon dioxide, water, and other waste products such as urea. Here's another pyramid of energy. The classic pyramid shape is fundamental to an energy pyramid because of the second law of thermodynamics. But remember, energy losses between trophic levels not only includes heat loss due to respiration, that's the second law, but also material not consumed or material not assimilated. Now, one other thing, the author of this diagram added decomposers, saprotrophs, to the pyramid. Now, this is not an easy task because decomposers digest organic molecules from all trophic levels, not just one level. The author placed the decomposers here for lack of a better idea, but I very much liked it. I'll come back to decomposers later in this movie. This energy diagram is quite nice to study. Photosynthetic production by autotrophs is here. Feeding by heterotrophs can be seen. All organisms respire, and due to the second law, high-quality energy is transformed to low-quality energy transferred out of the system as heat. And last but not least, as energy moves through the food chain, there are some losses other than those due to the second law of thermodynamics. Some energy from every trophic level passes to the detritivores, the saprotrophs, the decomposers. This diagram displays this nicely. In addition to the loss of energy as heat, some energy is lost as feces, material ingested but not assimilated. Some available high-quality energy never gets ingested. Here's another energy pyramid. The shape is triangular, and I want you to avoid building energy pyramids like this because it over-represents the amount of energy available from one trophic level to the next. But what I like about this diagram, the reason I've included it, is that decomposers have been added as a trophic level right here, consuming organic molecules from all other trophic levels. As you can see, all organisms release heat as part of energy transformation. Energy flows into, through, and out of ecosystems. But nutrients, matter, things with mass, cycle within. Now I've come back to this IB syllabus statement to strengthen the fine detail about the energy losses. Pay close attention. Here's another energy pyramid. Always avoid displaying an energy pyramid as a triangular shape. Always display the stepped form. The total photosynthetic production by autotrophs is represented by the full magnitude of this bar. Autotrophs use some energy for their own needs, respiration, labeled R here. This much organic chemical energy is left over after respiration. This is called net primary productivity. This is what's available to the next level up. Now the primary consumers take this much of what's available. Some of the material is not consumed. Now some of what the primary consumers eat is never assimilated and goes out as feces, labeled F, and some is respired, labeled R. The amount left over is called net secondary productivity. Secondary referring to the consumers. And this is what's available to the next level up. Now, the secondary consumers take this much. That's what's available. They take this much. Some they never pick up. Some of what's available they never pick up. They take this much. Some is lost as feces and respiration. And what's left is called net secondary production. The shape of the pyramid results from the transformation of energy by each trophic level. Energy proceeds towards disorder, toward a less useful form, toward heat. Here is a slightly different look. A plant absorbs solar energy and transforms it into chemical energy. This would be the first law of thermodynamics. The plant uses some of this energy for its own needs, leaving net primary productivity as what's available to the next level up. Now, approximately 10% of what's available at the producer level is left over as net productivity on the primary consumer level. And approximately 10% of what's available in the primary consumers is left over as net productivity in the secondary consumers, and so on. The energy in organic molecules has proceeded to a less ordered form, heat. And what we see here is loosely known as the 10% rule. 10% of what's available at one level is stored at the next level, 90% having been released as heat. The 10% rule is an efficiency calculation, a calculation that I looked at earlier in the movie. Just to dig in on the term assimilation that has appeared in the IB syllabus statement, I've got a diagram here of a consumer. Organic molecules are ingested, but some of those molecules are not assimilated into the organic molecules of the animal and are released as feces. Molecules taken up and transformed by the consumer are assimilated. These are the molecules that can be respired or remain left over as new mass of the animal. This is net production. As we head toward the end of this movie, here are our last IB syllabus statements. Distinguish between consumers, detritivores, and saprotrophs. State that saprotrophic bacteria and fungi recycle nutrients. So let's define detritivore. Detritivores are heterotrophs that obtain organic nutrients from detritus, non-living organic matter, by internal digestion. Detritivores ingest and then digest fragments of dead organisms and the wastes of living things, and the digestion happens internally within their gut. Now, decomposers or saprotrophs are heterotrophs that break down organic molecules of dead organisms into simple inorganic molecules through an external digestion. Saprotrophs break down complex organic molecules into simpler inorganic molecules by living in or on dead organic matter and secreting digestive enzymes into the dead organism and then absorbing the small molecules. By way of contrast, we tend to think of consumers as heterotrophs that feed on living organisms by ingestion. In this diagram that I've already shown you once in this movie, you can see the detritivores and the saprotrophs, the decomposers, who consume organic molecules from all trophic levels and then respire. The saprotrophic bacteria and fungi, the decomposers, recycle nutrients back into the soil to nourish plants. I used this diagram earlier in the movie as well, and hopefully you noticed these molecules that are taken up by the plant from the soil, in the soil water. Nitrates, sulfates, and phosphates are made available to the plant by decomposers in the soil. Detritivores, such as earthworms and insects, consume detritus, non-living organic matter fragments, and they digest the organic nutrients internally. Detritivores internally digest these fragments of dead organisms and the wastes of living organisms. Bacteria and fungi are saprotrophs. Saprotrophs are heterotrophs that break down organic molecules of dead organisms into simple inorganic molecules through an external digestion process. This model of the Earth displays how solar energy provides a continuous, albeit variable, supply of energy to the system. Sunlight is converted to chemical energy in the carbon compounds of plants by photosynthesis. Chemical energy and carbon compounds flows through the food chain by means of feeding. Energy is released from carbon compounds by respiration as organisms use energy for their own needs and transform that energy into heat, and heat is lost from ecosystems. Unlike energy, nutrients cycle. Matter cycles. The supply of nutrients in an ecosystem is finite and limited. This model of an ecosystem, just like the Earth, has the potential to be sustainable over long periods of time. This is a diagram of a mesocosm. A mesocosm is an experimental apparatus that attempts to model the natural environment under controlled conditions. Using mesocosms, certain variables could be manipulated while others are controlled in an attempt to better understand the important factors in nature. Mesocosms are potentially sustainable environments if the appropriate kind and quantity of organisms are put within the system. A mesocosm is a closed system. Energy enters, passes through, and out of the system, but nutrients cycle within the system. And that brings us to the end of IB Bio Ecology Core, Part 1.